national leader organizations. So social production is something where we are trying to find a solution to the problems in our social living condition. So we here see that journalism as social production can be defined as a combined work of different people involved in making the news or information. That is the journalist or the media organizations. So the media does not simply and transparently report events which are having or which have occurred, but it needs to have some newsworthiness in itself. Yeah. So we see that, news production is something which is very much routine, but we see that, that news is varying from one channel. See, the event could be the same, but there are different ways of showing that one. So the news stories are familiar, will be having a familiar format. Whatever the news value be, yeah, we see that there is something where it has a particular format to be done. So we see that, we also see that then how is the journalist would be covering the news. So the journalist is been assigned according to the beats. So beat is something where you are specialized in that particular area. So it could be a political beat, it could be a business beat, it could be a features writing beat. Yeah, it could be something science reporting beat. So beat is basically that decides where the journalist has his or her own interest, where you will be talking. So as a political journalist, you will be giving updates of the political parties, or you will be giving an analysis of the political parties. Yeah, so that way we see that the news production has a certain format, but also follows a certain rule, a familiar format. So whether the according to the policy, the news element or the news values or the news worthiness might change, but then we see that it's a fixed format. However, we see that the objective of social production of journalism in news reporting focuses on the responses to the social issues and as well as to the problem. Whatever the format be, whatever the kind of a beat be, we have to see that yes, it has to be informative and has to be disseminated. But at the same time, the objective of the a journalism as a social production should focus only on to the responses to the social issues as well as to the problems themselves. So it could be something like solutions to the stories or anchoring in the credible evidence, and or either explaining how and why responses are working, and if so not working, why they are not working. So overall, the goal of the journalistic approach is to present people with a truer and completely responsible based information, and also to give the complete information so that they come to a clear understanding and understand their role as a citizenship. So here we see that sociologists point out that the process of news selection could be biased because it is dependent upon the broad influences in which the organization works. So let us see what are those features or elements or issues that one organization to the other organization differs. So news coverage is basically shaped by television and the news companies or the newspapers, but there are been shaped on different ways, on some different elements. So that could be financial constraint, or it could be deadlines, or it could be audiences. So what are financial constraints? Yeah. Now we are talking about Gautam Adani thing. So what we feel that, see, the backbone of any media organization is the advertising. So if there is a flow, what is the source of, making the revenues in the media organization is only through the advertising, or where you have to see there is a flow of income. So financial constraints is something related to sending personal overseas and booking satellite connections can be expensive and may result in news report even if it is very little in actual. So there is a heavy cost in the production. So we need to retain that one. It is a cost of production. It is the cost of maintenance. It is the, paying the employees. So we see that, because of these financial constraints, definitely there is a reporting happening, but this investigative reporting or foreign affairs coverage are something where they cost so much. So there is a constraint, financial constraint that is stopping. So it is just not covering the press conferences or doing the events, but journalism, if it has to be having a social production, it should be having an investigative journalism or talking about the foreign affairs coverage. But however, we see these things are being not so much happening because of the financial constraints. So the amount of time available for a news bulletin or column space in the newspaper are also a big issue, because we see that events much more likely to be reported. They have this space constraints. So on the television, it is the telecast constraint, and in the newspaper, it is the space. So if they we see that because of the space constraint, then again they have to drop the news. So the other point where we see that the newspaper organizations consider the news are depending upon the deadlines. So if you see the deadlines in the newspaper, they are very much important. All news include usually that has happened before, but where we see television is more immediate one and often broadcast as it happens. So it is a rolling news that has to keep updated about the events that are happening. So the other one is the audience. The content and the style of a news program basically depends on the type of the audience that are watching or reading the newspaper. So it is basically related to the social characteristics of a newspaper reader. For example, the foreign paper like the Sun is aimed at working class young readership. No, let us not let us take the best example of Deccan Chronicle or Hindu or Times of India. So when we talk about the Hindu newspaper, it is basically aimed at a working class young readership, yeah, that way. But when it comes to the Deccan Chronicle, it is having a simple language. So that is how we see that the readership totally changes according to the social background of the reader. So we see what Herman and Chomsky in 1988 have found that in this social production of news, there could be a various interests that affects the process. There will be a sort of filters. They have mentioned, there are 5 filters that sort out the news or decide the news. The first one is the size, the concentrated ownership, owner wealth, and profit orientation of the dominant mass media firms. Then the second one is advertising as a primary income source of the mass media. Then the third is the reliance of the media on information provided by the government or business and the experts, and that has been funded and approved by these primary sources. Then the fourth one is flag as a mean of disciplining the media. Then the fifth one is anti-communism as a national religion and control mechanism. So these are the different 5 elements that we see that help are being used for filtering and sorting out the news. These elements interact with and reinforce one another. The raw material of news must pass through success. These are the filters that we see that the news will be passing on. So, however, we see that Stuart Hall and the group, that is et al. In 1978 says that these 2 aspects of social production of news. What is that first one? So it is not only in 88, but in 1978 also the Stuart Stall and the group has done research and found out that there are another 2 aspects also that affect the social production of the news. One is bureaucratic organization of the media, which produces the news, and the other one is the specific type of the categories and the structures of the news, which orders the selection and ranking of particular stories within these categories. So these are part of the news process. The third aspect is the moment of the construction of the news story itself. This is very important, equally important. So this involves the presentation of the item to be assumed to the audiences. If the world is not to be represented in a chaotic way, it should be identified, you know. But however, we see that, these are, we need to see, on the one hand, we need to also protect the identity of the audiences so that, they are not being prone to any kind of a risk. So social production of a news also has gender bias. So here, how we are trying to categorize as a gender on the gender biases. News organizations have been male dominated and tend to divide journalists by gender, assigning men to hard topics and like military, crime, and economics, and women to the soft, humanized topics. So generally, it was the trend before 2000 that men used to report only all this related to the military, crime, economics, and all those things. But let us not forget Barkha Dutt, who has covered the Kargil war also. So the trend has now changed, but previously. But whatsoever, we agree that it is only the 10 or 20% of women who are daring to talk about the issues, hard related topics, and but most of them talk about the soft based stories. So what is social construction of reality? Yeah, here and journalism. Let us understand journalism in terms of social construction of reality. So the social construction is a basic thing, and we feel where we feel that individuals view the world in certain manner, and the media asks them to understand the same concept in their own way, as media helps to shape that particular view. Yeah. So reality is something which is incorporated to the notion of having an objective independent existence or occurring in fact. So reality is where it is trying to talk about the objectivity. So objectivity is where it is catering to the larger people. So the social construction of reality accepts its very nature as a subjective experience with the reality, either via media coverage or via media dictation. So this social construction of reality is something where we have to give the social related issues, but it is basically trying to have more subjective experience than the objective and independent experience. So the social construction of reality targets the most dramatic fundamental effect of the mass media. For example, if you see, the media actually presents the public knowledge of an event in some cases and tries to argue the individuals are unable to distinguish between real and mediated. This is an live topic related to the present social media, where the people who are using social media are not able to understand what is real or what is mediated. So three categories can be directly linked to the social construction of the reality. First is Bandura's social learning theory that suggests that how mass media consumers learn appropriate societal actions. Second is cultivation theory that talks about how people line their views of the world with those presented in the world. And the third one is agenda setting that presents the notion how the media dictates the importance of issues and events to the public. The latter has powerful ramifications for the establishment of a pop culture. See, the change in the cultures, the change in the trends is all about the agenda settings. So media, ultimately we understand that, media creates and spreads symbols that become the bias for our shared understanding in the society. However, we see that, the social theorists and the researchers, communication researchers work in the interactions where they try to focus on the social construction of the reality. And media constructs reality in a number of ways. For some, the people they watch on a screen can become a primary group. Yeah, like for example, the informal groups of people who are close to them. And for others, media becomes a reference group. Yeah, it is just like watching or somewhere where we see that, media is a reference group, where we see that, group is been influenced by an individual to compare the kind of how we try to compare about the styles and all those things. So it becomes a comparison also. So some forms of media discourse allow competing constructions of reality to appear. For example, advertisers find new and creative ways to sell products which we probably don't have without their prompting. So somewhere, though the media is been platform for the advertisers, but anyhow we are also using it. So that is the reality that that media and advertising have to go hand in hand. Then social networking and social construction. So with the emergence of the technology, we see all these Twitters, Facebook, everything. So we see that they are trying to encourage to check in and provide details of daily activities through social networking or social media network sites. So Facebook has started a free social network for a social for all groups of people. It could be a student group, it could be a professional. So you have different groups in the social Facebook where we see that. So it has now turned into a monetized. That is why we see Facebook that has turned into a meta thing. So Facebook as one of our online advertisement, they have come with those social construction and network realities where they are trying to promote consumerism in the forms of games and fandom. Then, what are the approaches to the pressure sociology? So there are, we see that that there are various theoretical approaches being used in the area about press sociology. Fundamental to the media research has been understanding of how human communication happens, and we understand the basic communication processes. So who says what by using which using what channel to whom with what effect. So this is what Laswell's model of communication, where we say that who says what to whom with what effect through which channel. So that is the common understanding of a human communication. But there are certain approaches that we see that social inquiries have considered in terms of the journalism. So the social of journalism has several objectives of inquiry, that is examining situation and larger cultural differences, and you have analyzing systematic complexities in which journalism arises, that as we say journalism is on the rise with the technological development. So with the ever growing continuous growing of this technology change, events, normative, all those things also creates and complexity in the journalism. Then there are certain intended or unintended consequences of practical routines of journalism. Then there is also exploring long term patterns of professional, institutional, and organizational changes. So, press sociology or sociology of mass media basically examines the institutions, products, and audiences of the broadcast. It could be related to the broadcast, it could be related to the print, and now recently the online media and the social media. Its origin can be traced back to the traditions growing early in America and European sociology thinking, which recognize the growth and influence of the media. And it has also noticed the importance of transforming or modernizing the society. Since then, media sociology has developed primarily outside of the mainstream sociology in departments of media. So, press sociology is something where we see is been keep growing, though not part of the sociology department, but part of the allied departments. So, we see that there are various approaches of the press sociology which they in which they explore different influences factors of journalistic activity. There is a mass society approach that has been influential in the mass media studies. The Marxist Frankfurt School saw the mass media as industry used to control the masses. So the media contributed to the survival of capitalism here. So the mass society was something, and the Marxist Frankfurt School, it is a school of thought that has seen the media as contributory towards the survival of capitalism by encouraging the working class to be passive recipients of the ideologies or the ideologies, so that they can control, have a social control and maintenance of the capitalist values. Then the other approach is about the ideological control. This approach sees that media or messages are supporting those who are in the power, but it can be conveying a false view of reality, encouraging passivity and acceptance of the status or whatsoever. So this is what we see these days. So many videos are being circulated, and everybody keeps talking about media getting being controlled by the ruling party or by the business class and all those things. So theorists have pointed the use of media in totalitarian society to gain the support for the ideologies those are in power, and in democratic states to foster powerful consumer cultures. So mass media approaches became less influential in the late 20th century as the concept of mass media lost ground, and media institutions and patterns of ownership totally changed because of the ideological control. Then we have effects research approach. This is basically where we see that, reflecting sociological and psychological interest, where we see there is a shift in the attention from the impact of media on mass media to the audience and their users and the responses. So gradually we saw that, there is some kind of effect. There is an audience where we have to see that, how they are using the media and what is the impact on that one. Some researchers derived negative assumptions and fears. Yeah. So we talk about uses and gratification theory. So that is what the effects theory is all about, where we see that, definitely media has some impact on humankind. So it could be something, where we see that the pictures, when we see some, crime pictures or something, we are disturbed and all those things. So these are the different approaches. The culture and social cultural approaches paid attention to both message and audiences, examining the role of popular culture for particular social groups. So now, for example, we can say very positively that a LGBT kind of a community you have. So the Facebook, the social media has provided a better platform for them. So there is an cultural and social approaches. So there is a negative impact and there is a positive impact. Then the other one is the ritual communication approach that says the media plays a significant role in reproducing the rituals and getting them into as a collective comment to the people. If we go back to the communication of definition of a communication by Menis McQuell, he says that, communication is something which has a common understanding and common sharing. So applying the same thing, this communication process through media helps to unite the people with the same kind of a concept of the religion or celebration or something. So that way. So the ritual communication approach has been explored in several ways, where media is seen to reproduce ideas of community and solidarity. In broadcasting of civic ritual, it helps in constructing general media events and depicting crisis situations such as terrorist incidents. So this is how the ritual, when we are saying, is just not related to the kind of attitude or the values, but also the issues related which are facing the crisis. The another approach is about the dominant discourse approach proposed by Michael Foucault, where he says that, discourses are observed as offering claims to the truth and underpinning the actions. So media sociologists who follow this approach examine media content as sites of contest between truth claims or discourses. Like it could be medical information, it could be a consumer information, it could be a political information, where they try to see that, they have been observed whether they are right or wrong, or there could be a break path of about medical development, about any issues or something. So this is dominant discourse approach. But there are certain limitations for the approaches to the fresh sociology. The approaches for the limitations could be, it could be a packaged popular culture, or it could be a critical anxiety. So there are definitely effects. When we are talking about the effects approach, uses and gratification, it is something where your mind could be dealing with a fear or anxiety or excitement or ecstasy or something. So there are certain limitations. Then we see the limitations to the ideological control approach, according to neo-Marxist, says that, the bourgeois owners of media companies do not have time to micromanage media content. There is another limitation, that is profit making surpasses the ideological control of the press. So these are this packaged kind of a journalism, or critical anxiety, or we say that ideological control. All these are part of the issues that limit the press sociology. So there is a growing consensus that is difficult to reach to a conclusion on the effects of the mass media, but there are conditions where we see that generation of the information can bring media where it can become play a very important role and act as a catalyst and also be part of the social construction. There is another approach called as the realistic economic approach. So economic approaches increasingly now play a very greater role in the media and communication policy making, because without money, the media organization cannot exist. So these approaches are being used in a belief that economic analysis offer fundamentally important means for studying choices and alternatives, and explains about their potential outcomes under a variety of conditions and situations. So economic approaches apply a variety of perspectives, models, and theories to inform choices involving media structures and the functions of the particular organizations. The mainstream media of newspaper, radio, and television have two different markets. First is the consumer market for the media products and services, and the second one is the advertising product, in which a service is being sold to the advertisers in the form of access to the audience. So media provides both types of the market at the same time. So what are the principles, economic principles of media market? They are basically are been categorized in the following way. So media still differ according to whether they have fixed or variable cost structures. Media markets have increasingly multiple income character. Media is based on advertising revenue. So the real economist approach is the outcome of influence of globalization. So with the effect of the globalization, also we see that there is so much of economic approach, because it has to get equipped. The first part of media organization is that it is a very high end cost it has to take up. So there definitely we see there is a globalization impact also on the media. So that is how we see that that the trends keep on changing, so they have to survive into this throat cut competition. So the first phase what we see is that the influence of globalization can be categorized into two phases. The first phase is emerging communication industrial policies, and the second phase is about the public service. And the public service, in a sense, where the media has to promote the initiatives of the government about the national integrity, promoting the industrial and economic development. And the third phase is called as a new paradigm, which is the result of the trend of globalization, digitalization, and convergence. So these are the trends that we see that there is a the realistic economic approach where they have to revise and reshape their organizations fitting to the globalization. But that remains a very big question, where journalism is able to cater to the social context of the society or not. So there is another organizational and cultural approach where it focuses about the relationship between journalist and the editorial board. So this is now talking about the editorial content being produced by the newspaper or the media organization, which is a major issue that affects about the media messages, isn't it? Because we understand there is a gatekeeping theory where the editor will select the stories according to the organization policy or different, depending upon their different policy decision, and as well as the demand according to the situation. So the organizational approaches focuses on three levels. First is the relation between the individual journalist and the editorial board, and the second one is the relationship between the organization and the other organization. That is how this organization, the competition between two media organizations, and the relation between the new organization and the society. Whatsoever they have specific common characteristics, that is, organizations are directed towards a specific long-term goal. organizations have introduced and adopted some part or order and structure, and they have thereby established certain rules, and they are more complex organization where and the use of certain resources so that they can achieve the goal. So these are the organizational approaches. Then there is a cultural approach also. So cultural approach is something where it focuses on the subjectivity of the readers and the audience of the mass media. So it is basically catering to that one. A special feature of cultural journalism studies is in the fact that they explore the textual relationship between the producers. So who are the media producers? They could be media corporations or government agencies, and the recipients are the audiences. So such textual relationships of coding and encoding, decoding of the messages have been studied to the smallest detail, and they dominate the meaning of the messages and how these messages are composed by large media corporations and how the audience receives them. So there is a cultural approach. So because one of the functions of the media is also to promote the culture. So now let us understand journalism, the socio-cultural change in India, how journalism has played or brought a social change in India. So we see that the mass media is very important of the part of the democracy, and also very important as part of the social institution which caters to the social and economic needs of a wider society, and it plays very important with special reference to the India. So but however we see that in the post globalization era, media has to educate people from changing their traditional attitude to suit the modern progressive needs. So Dennis Blackwell described media as engine of change. Media can strengthen moral and spiritual values in the cross-cultural and multi-dimensional society. In agro-based society, in media, it can educate people for bringing awareness regarding sustainable development. So that way we understand that journalism and the media has a special role as a social institution in terms of bringing socio-economic development and also educating the society depending on what society we are dealing with. Ultimately, there should be, for example, in an agro-based society, they have to understand how the extension to be conducted or education to be brought up and awareness to be created regarding the sustainable development. The best example and the successful examples are the SITE project and the KEDA communication project. So the SITE project, as everybody understands, what a satellite instructional television experiment in 1975 to 1977, where it was a successful, television experiment where it helped in economic development in the few districts, a few states, and some 240 villages were being covered as part of the education. Here, the communication project was also launched in 75. So we see that the Indian economy was liberalized in 1991. Yeah, a number of international players were seeking to enter the media sector. The most prominent player or the person who entered was the Star Network owned by Rupert Murdoch. The television and radio, which were previously under the direct or indirect control of the government of India, was able to host a lot of content from abroad because of the LPG policies that was been passed in 1991. A lot of content from markets such as the USA and UK was suddenly accessible to the India. The movies, music, and television content flooded the Indian markets along with others in the Southeast Asia. So one of the outcomes of liberalization of economy was that in a span of few years, entertainment content creation soared, and the audience also had an opportunity to witness different cultures and reality. This created an opportunity for exposure to India's own culture. Yeah. So we see, but then we see this liberalization policies that it created an imbalance in information between the global north and global south also. Yeah. Here, this aided in providing exposure to the world outside, thereby abating the process of social cultural convergence. The impact of journalism can be judged only in the perspective of current developments and pace of the changes that is bringing in the country. And journalism has done a reasonably good job in highlighting the issues of poverty, corruption, and employment, and other political issues like corruption. So the growing presence of women in journalism has opened a new era for enhancement of socio-economic conditions and towards a women empowerment also. The media boom in India resulted in need for the adequate representation of women in public and private sectors of the media. The society is influenced by cultural society, by the culture, and media has shaped public consciousness also. Media indeed means the cultural dependency. The national and regional media groups in India played a very important role in preservation of Indian cultural identity. If you see that in the 1990s, Indian media emerged as a cultural perspective with the advent of Bollywood, which was the Indian version of Hollywood, and India joined in the globalism where Indian media products became an instrument of Indian culture. That is how we see that, that in the foreign countries they talk about the Indian food, Indian culture, Indian style of dressing and all those things. So because of this LPG policies, we see that, there is so much of exchange of communication from all the corners of the world. We also see that, for the first time, the BBC has shown interest in local language. So, and that is why we see that, BBC in Telugu, Urdu, and all the different languages. In protecting the national culture of India, it has strong local and regional media's role has been very much important. So, this is all about that one. Moving on to the news values in perspective. Now, as part of that, as part of this unit, you will be understanding the assessing, you will try to understand and assess the problems of the fact finding and explain the handling of sources for getting different views. You will analyze the changing concept of news values, describe the news values of the third world, and discuss the news values of rationality, fact journalism, and stress of writing good stories. So, news values. What are news values? So, how do you define any event as a news? So, basically, they are being defined by the news values. So, these news values are general guidelines or the criteria which determine the importance of a news story. So, news values are the elements that make you help you understand that whether the event is worth a news story or not. So they explain why a story has some interest for their own audience and how editors and other journalists decide that one particular of information should be set as a news or not. So media outlets, including newspapers, magazines, and televisions. So the major positive effect of implementing news values is presenting facts. So how we decide is one part, but the news values help us also to present the facts. So, however, we are seeing that, there is so much of, so much of issues that are coming when we are talking about the news elements and presenting the facts. The methods of communication transfers have changed in recent times. So there are so are the news values. Technology, people, societies all lead to the new consumption of information. There are also divergent news values for the third world countries, which highlight regional centric angles. So there are also some contradictory issues which come in the way of deciding the newsworthiness of information, like, rationality, prejudging, labeling, are various factors where a journalist should be cautious and shouldn't go for that one. Fact journalism, tunnel journalism are also other weaknesses that a journalist journalists have controversies. So the journalist is always under stress, psychological and professionally organizations. Organizationally, he or she undergoes the pressure, has a psychological and professional pressure also to present a good story. So, there are certain problems in fact finding. So let us understand what are the problems in the fact finding. A fact is something where you have a true information related to the event. So you have to improve that. You can prove it. You have to present a fact, something where it is exactly represented. So a fact can be defined as something to have happened or supposed to be true. But we see that journalists need to know how reliable the statements are before you report to them. So this determines how you present to your readers and viewers and listeners. So here, depending upon the journalist's understanding of the fact is being projected to the audience. So the journalist should have a better understanding and also be true in understanding and presenting the information to the viewers and the listeners or the readers. So there is a criteria for selecting newsworthy facts, where we see that so what is the criteria? Basically the criteria is the newsworthiness or the news values that helps in selecting the news. So journalists' ability to capture and deliver factual information is very central to the sense of the professionalism. According to the prominent journalist and intellectual Walter Lippmann, news and truth are not the same thing and must be clearly distinguished. So why he is saying? Because there are certain problems faced by a journalist in finding facts. Now the journalist should be able to get the right sources. They should avoid the bias. They should manage balance, accuracy. So these are the problems. If the journalist is overlooking this one, then the stories are totally manipulative. So facts are basically incredibly very easy to be manipulated. So study of press accuracy routinely find mistakes, sometimes many of them in the news media report itself. So this means when journalists, even the best ones, think they are getting it right, they are all too often wrong. So we are human in nature, so errors are inevitable, but the best defense against them is the constant vigilance and the alertness. So getting the right source, how the journalist should deal in reliable facts. So it is important that the sources what you are writing are using for your stories should be should have an accurate information. It should not be just gossiping or forwarding the information, but it should have accurate information, because this will help where you will find lots of difference in the event. So there are many different sources of information. Some would be very accurate information, and those are called as the reliable information. Others are less reliable but still useful, which some can be hardly to be trusted. However, the main factor for judging sources of information is their reliability. We also see that there is a danger that reporters misinterpret what they think they see and they present that as a fact. Here, there is another problem in reporting facts which are reliable. When the sources give information which is defamatory, it may lead to legal problems. So there are certain areas where in case the reporter is not collecting the information and being cautious in giving the information, they can also have defamation cases against them, or lead to the legal problem. They are the most dangerous. So anonymous sources. When if you read a newspaper, sometimes you see that anonymous sources. So the reporter or the journalist or the editorial team should be you confident of that anonymous sources. Otherwise, this is a very dangerous source of information, and this should be mostly avoided, and it should be used very carefully with extreme caution. Now, another problem while reporting the fact is how to better represent the news is by avoiding the bias. We have to see that all bias is something where it is a prejudice or a favor for or against an individual. So it is often an inaccurate and unfair judgment. So all human beings are mostly biased. It is normal, although it is not desirable. There are some sociological factors which lead to the bias. It could be background, it could be upbringing, it could be the personal experiences, societal stereotypes, cultural contexts. One can argue that draining of a story of all bias can drain its own humanity, its lifeblood. In the bias of the community, one can also find conflicting passions that bring stories to life. A bias can be the foundation for investigative journalism. It may prompt the new organization to right a wrong and take up an unpopular case. So the job of a journalist is not to stamp out bias, rather journalists should learn how to manage it by giving up accurate coverage of the facts. And as well, you have to manage you have to balance in journalism is considered a most important characteristics of any newspaper, because it is the ethical imperative of a journalist. Balance becomes a problem in fact finding as it conceals some objectivity. So whether to say or not, how to balance. So balance or impartiality requires the presentation of all the main points. Then we have accuracy. It is also very important. These are basically the principles of journalism. So plays an important role with regard to the uh, providing the facts of the story. It forces journalists not only to ground their reporting on facts, but to check whether presented facts are not. So before you submit your story, you have to be doubly sure and be very much accurate. So this journalistic truth is a process that brings the professional discipline of assembling and verifying facts, and the journalists try to convey and should convey on a fair and reliable account. So now, when we have a similar event, what are the factors that give different views of the same event? So, in the process of production of the news, we see that there are several events. We do have a news gathering, we have interviews, we have sources, we do research and try to find out more information. So, gathering different views of information is like you have a different understanding and they have a different viewpoints. Everyone has a different point of view. Some people focus on the era, some on the media, some on the color, or some on the texture. So there is something to learn from each viewpoint. So the reader or audience might arrive at a better understanding and understand the strength and weakness of each side in a following way. So getting different same view can be done in a systematic way. Like whatsoever, the news should be presented from both the sides. It should have a multiple source and it should have a verification. So when we project only one news, there is a confusion, there is a bias, there is there is a partiality. So that has to be avoided and has to be presented on from it has to designate that particular piece rather than the opinion or giving the views. It has to be presented in that way. Then you should have a multiple sources. Reliable sources are the best one. If not, in case if you have an anonymity or you are trying to maintain anonymity, though it is required in certain cases like crime or some confidential cases. So you need to have a multiple sources to doubly check and make it sure that what is the source of your information. So multiple sources also often indicate more active news media orientation as the secret information themselves rather than relying on a limited. So we cross check with the multiple sources. Then verification is a very good practice in the part of the good journalism to cross check what people say with at least one independent source. So if you cross check, if you are cross checking, that means you are approaching to their opponents for confirmation of the detail. So verification is a process that takes newsworthy information and checks its credibility and reliability before it is published or broadcast. So there are two types of evidence collected by the journalists. It is the direct evidence, which is captured from the source, and indirect evidence, which comes in a second hand. The direct evidence is captured from the source, such as from someone that is directly related to a story or an eyewitness of the event. Yeah. Videos and photographs are stronger evidence than documentary evidences. So the eyewitness accounts from a journalist is stronger than the eyewitness account from a citizen. A journalist is not always able to correct the evidence because of the deadlines and of the deadlines. And the indirect evidence is something where it comes as a second hand or from the second source, from someone who is knowledgeable on the subject or a story, but not not directly involved. So stories are more balanced when multiple points of view are presented. It also avoids false information. Collecting different points of the same event, it may also eliminate any motive behind the views. So there are different ways, views from the same source. Now you will have a similar source, but there could be a different views. This also is a big issue. So news writing depends on the information. The quality of writing is tied to the quality of the information. So it becomes a privilege for the journalist to get different views from the same source or lead to the providing incoherent news stories. It is a responsibility of the journalist to deal cautiously in collecting the information from the sources. So there are some sources and there are some categories where the journalist should follow. One is that he has to cross-check the information what he is getting. then you has to see that, same source talking to different journalists, and he has to be more apprehensive on the part of the source. Then a follow-up story has to be done. So cross-checking is always, very important when we give as a news, because it comes in the recorded form. So you have to be more careful as a journalist. So the issue of different views of the same source happens when the reporter tries to cross check with the source, or when the story is presented to the source for in confirmation or for more information. So the same source talking to different journalists also, there is also a problem of getting different views from the same source to different journalists. This happens when the source is contacted in different places by different journalists personally. This may occur because of the veracity of the journalist who can get more information. It all depends upon your contacts and the kind of a relationship. Apprehension on the part of the source is another, also a problem of getting the views in different manner, because of the fear of source being victimized. So the source may not reveal it because they might have always a fear or a risk of getting open to the any kind of a risk. Follow up from the source in some interesting and live topics which can continue for long period, it is suggested to get more information from the source, same from the first source what you got it. This follow-up information may provide different views from the same source on the bias of new evidence. So there are methods of getting wide range of information now, apart from face-to-face. So earlier it was only when you have a face-to-face one-on-one interviews, but there are many other ways where you can be now in this present social media boom. We see that there are other sources, but you have to see that you have a cross-checking, you have a factual checking, you need to be accurate, you need to be balanced, and you need to cross-check, and you have a follow-up story. So follow-up story is very important in any media organization, but in social media it is more so very important. We see that there is a change in concept of the news values. So how let us understand how they are changing according to the time. So newsworthiness or news value is a term discussed, as we have discussed, that it gives the importance to the event. So a classical definition about the news value was developed by two Norwegian social scientists, Johan Galtung and Mary Holmboe, and officially published in 1965. Galton and Rook's listed news values are open to question. Several attempts have been revised to the list of criteria. So the dominance of celebrity and social news, the blurring of boundary between the news and reality shows another popular culture. So there are, news values that we see in the recent times that have come. It is about the frequencies that occur suddenly and fit well into the newspaper organization setting. Then you have timeliness, then you have negativity, then you have familiarity, then you have ambiguity, personalization, meaningfulness, reference to the elite nations, elite persons, conflict. These are all the news values that we see are deciding the news factors and the stories. So the time constraints and the news organization. But then we see that the news values are this for the democratic country or the developing country or the developed country. But there are certain news values that are different for the third value. So Galton and Rook's theory in 1965 has rarely been tested in cultural contexts other than the Western industrialized countries. So news values are not universal and can vary depending upon the cultures or the countries or the nations. So when we are referring to the third world, we see the term third world was coined by Cold War to distinguish those nations that are neither with the West nor with the East. The term is often used to describe developing countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So the third world news principles basically have a priority on development, national integration, and social responsibility and education. So William Hudson, Jack Loon, and David Roby identified different issues of news values and presentation in the third world countries, which are development, national integration, social responsibility, and education. So so when we are talking about the third world reporting or journalism, so these are the basic news values that are more dominating. So the rational nature of the news. So rationality leads to, why we are talking about the rationality, because it helps to understand, removes the impartiality, removes the partiality. So ensuring impartiality is very important, because it helps in giving a broad view of information and gives a particular weightage to the opinion or a particular topics. It helps the journalist to construct the narrative surrounding the range of the opinion on a particular. So the rational nature of news is the best quality that a good journalist should follow. And Wilbur Scrum, in his article titled The Nature of News, says that news exists in the minds of the people. It is the rational construction of the event by the journalist. So the output, which is called news, it should serve meaningful purpose for the reader. So the rationality nature of the news is confirmed by taking its audience and appeal and profitability. Prejudging and labeling. So we see that it is very unfortunate to news that unfortunate in the present trend also, we see that we try to prejudge and label while deciding the newsworthiness of the story. So this happens because of the bias of the journalist or the emotional status of the journalist. The background and the social status can also be the leading factor. There is a chance of prejudging by the journalist or the editorial team, which he totally believes the source believes the source and is convinced by the information. So the journalist may come to the logical conclusion on the basis of the supplied information, but you have to be very much careful. For example, if a journalist writes a news item related to anticipating the course of a trial, it would be prejudging the outcome. So, there is so much of prejudging. Labeling is something we see that, they try to talk about, use labels and titles to describe people, places, and events. Yeah, in many places around the world, one person's friend is another's person enemy. A person can be called as ex-con. So the words that are being used specifically to talk about, Rahul Gandhi been talking about something, or Modi given one particular name, is all labeling. Then pack journalism refers to the standards news coverage that can occur when reporters multiply. Then you have tunnel vision also. So it is something where you have to look beyond the information to make it more accurate. So when to avoid tunnel vision, you have to see that it should be original content and solicit other opinions. Coping with pressure for good stories is most important for a good journalist. So this is all about the press sociology and about the newsworthiness. So we have come to our end of the syllabus. With this, we have completed our session. In case if you have any doubts or queries or anything, please let me know. So we have completed our syllabus.
Ma'am, good morning. Ma'am, what about assignments, ma'am?
All those are related to the office work, ma. So for that one, you have to contact Sunil sir and Giri sir, if I'm not mistaken. Whoa, you have to contact them only. How did you get in the previous semester? The same way
We get previous semester we get early assignments.
You put
they
a
said
message
about the exams, but they did not inform about assignments. Okay. And we get enough time for assignment also, ma'am. If they are giving early, we can also prepare for that now.
Okay, ma. Okay, you put a word to Sunil. I'll also remind it. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
And what about, ma'am, important topics also, ma'am, we need, because for exam point of view, we want to touch specific particular topics.
Yeah. You say it will be shared accordingly with the coordination of Sunil sir. Okay, ma. Okay, any doubts or anything? I will end the session because we have a next session to be followed.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. All the best. Yeah.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am.